This has been a big week for right-wing conservatives. On September 21st, House Republicans saw victory in the House with the passage of House Resolution 3134, a bill that would place a moratorium on the flow of federal funds to Planned Parenthood. On Friday, John Boehner stepped down from both his position as Speaker of the House and as representative for Ohio after facing years of criticism from his party. What led up to these events? How will politicians respond? And what will all of this mean for the future of Congress and for the Republican Party? All this tonight on Politik Focus. So here with us tonight to talk about Planned Parenthood is Tanya Chatterjee. So Tanya, I would first like to talk about the federal funding for Planned Parenthood. And so can you tell us a little bit about where this money comes from and where exactly does it go?
Sure. So Planned Parenthood, about 1/3 of the funding comes from Medicaid and Title X, which is the National Family Planning Program. And most of this goes towards STI testing and treatment, HIV testing and counseling, birth control programs, as well as sex education, and among other services that are provided, cancer screenings, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, cervical cancer. This is all done by Planned Parenthood as a part of the reproductive health care that they provide for women all across the United States. And abortion is actually not federally funded, it is entirely privately funded.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah. Okay, so then we know that the videos that have been released recently have provided, Planned Parenthood, have provided the impetus for the bill. So could you talk about those videos a little bit, what exactly the content of them is, what the controversy has been over, and whether that controversy is warranted?
Sure. This group called the Center for Medical Progress released a number of videos. They're just ongoing every week, and they've been coming out since, I think, end of July. And they are heavily edited to seem to show that Planned Parenthood benefits from the sale of fetal tissue, which comes from aborted fetuses. And of course, this is not true. It's a federally funded organization that abides by the very strict ethical and legal procedure surrounding a procedure like this. And the videos are edited and they're purposely made to be scandalous. So they have price sheets that they show, like a heart is worth $200 or a liver is worth, and it just makes it seem like there's no compassion, and it's just body parts, and that is not absolutely true at all. As with any laboratory facility, there are costs for storage and transportation of tissues. They have to be kept in certain conditions, and that is really all that those little prices are. It's not like Planned Parenthood is benefiting in any way, monetary or otherwise, from the sale of fetal tissue parts. Right. That's not what it is. So it's just that the videos are edited so heavily, and they're filmed secretly and not in a legal way to begin with, and they're just edited to make it seem like it's a benefit when it's informed consent, and every procedure is in place to make sure that it's done correctly, and that is how they do the procedures.
Okay, interesting. Okay, well, so the bill that was put forth did not pass the Senate claimed that it did not want to deny access to women's health care, and that those funds would be reallocated to other clinics to fund women's health care. So had this bill gone into effect, realistically, what would have been its impact on women's health care?
Planned Parenthood serves about 2.6 million nationwide every year, and community health centers that presumably would have received the funding had Planned Parenthood been defunded would have had the responsibility of taking in these women, and that just would have been impossible. I mean, Planned Parenthood provides reproductive health care. It's a very specific portion of women's health care, and they provide so many different things. It's a comprehensive place to get health care, and community health centers are overwhelmed as it is. And the other thing is Planned Parenthood provides health care for low-income women that may not have insurance or other means of paying, and it's just not possible for other clinics around the nation to take up on that burden of that many women that go to Planned Parenthood every year for their care, even if they're not able to afford it, or even if they don't have insurance.
Well, and so then this is sort of in the same vein, but could you speak to then the effect that there has been on this the state level of Republicans sort of putting in like other, not specifically Republicans, but those against abortion, especially in particular, is one of the more prominent areas of controversy. So what has been the effect on the state level of other policies that have tried to be put into place to prevent things like abortion?
Sure. There have been a few examples in the recent past. In Louisiana recently, Planned Parenthood was cut off from funding, right after these videos came out. And currently, and in Louisiana, Planned Parenthood does not even do abortions, so that's not even related.
Right.
But of course, they do STI testing, HIV counseling, everything else, birth control. And New Orleans is going through a syphilis outbreak, and Louisiana has a pretty high number of gonorrhea, syphilis in general, chlamydia, and other STIs. And so you're cutting off funding, not even for abortion, because they don't do abortion there, Planned Parenthood, but you are cutting it off from women that need access to other health care services.
Right.
And that, in turn, is just removing access in general to women's health care, and that's a big problem. In Texas, a while ago, a bill passed where Planned Parenthood clinics, among other clinics, had to abide by the same standards that surgical centers and hospitals have, and that includes very small things. It seems small, but they're actually logistically very hard to pull off, like wider doorways to fit, like gurneys and things like that. And that caused a bunch of Planned Parenthoods to immediately get cut off from funding and get shut down. And there were a number of articles talking about the decreased access and the immediate effect that it had on women in Texas. And there was a study that showed that, probably for the average woman, the nearest Planned Parenthood, were they, if they needed to get an abortion or other services, was 200 miles away. And that is a huge distance. And, that brings in the topic of privilege as well. If you have a high-paying job, you can afford to take a day or two off and travel to go get your services needed, you can do that. But for most women that access Planned Parenthood, they're not in that privileged setting, and they really can't afford for their health care to be so far away, and they're not in the circumstance to be able to do that. So those are just some of the few implications that could happen at the state level.
Right, and as evidenced by all the examples that you've just brought up and the recent debate over the bill, this is still clearly a very hot topic and a very thoroughly covered, controversial issue.
Right.
So why do you think that decades after Roe v. Wade that this is still such a hot topic?
Honestly, I'm not even sure, because it really, really should not be. But I think it just comes down to, for whatever reason, people not being okay with women choosing what, to make their own decision about their health care. And abortion is a part of health care. That's just what it comes down to. So I think that's just what it is. People are not comfortable with that scenario. If a woman chooses to have an abortion because she thinks that is the best decision for her life at that time, for whatever reason, it doesn't sit well with people, and they're not okay with that. And same, and the problem is, though, by cutting off funding to abortion, you're not just affecting abortion, you're affecting, in the example of Planned Parenthood, STI testing, HIV counseling, birth control, cancer screenings, and that's the whole package, right?
Well, as you said, it's not even federally.
It's not even federally funded abortion from Planned Parenthood.
Right.
So you're cutting off the whole package, and if you're, for example, limiting access to birth control, there are not going to be less abortions. There will be more, because women don't have access to do what they need to protect themselves. So it really doesn't make sense. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for adding all that insight and for speaking with us tonight
problem.
about Planned Parenthood. Now we have Ninne Nani here to talk with us about John Boehner's resignation.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for coming back. So first, I'd like to just generally talk about his tenure as Speaker of the House. So how would you characterize John Boehner's reign as Speaker of the House?
Sure. So just to give a little context, in 2008, the GOP was in the dumpster in Congress, and they had just lost the presidential cycle as well. But as you all know, in 2010 and 2014, Boehner presided over two huge waves for the Republicans. I think they picked over 60 seats in 2010, and they also, after 2014, had their largest House majority since the 1920s or 1930s. And Boehner certainly played a large part in that. He raised over $300 million for the Republican candidates over the past 5 years. So he definitely had a role in their large majorities. At the same time, as you all also know, during these past few years, some of the internal divisions between the Republican Party and within the coalition have kind of surfaced. And so this has made Boehner's reign kind of challenging. There's been a lot of infighting between different factions within the House. In general, like polarization has paralyzed Washington, and so I don't think we've seen a lot of big legislation passed during his reign. So it's certainly been a difficult 5 years for him, and I think that had played a large part in his decision to step down.
Right. Well, and that was actually my next question. So do you think that it was a voluntary decision to step down, or do you think he was, for the most part, forced out?
Well, as we know, there have been repeated threats to oust him over the past few years, especially from what is called the House Freedom Caucus.
Okay.
In his vote for Speaker in 2014, right after the midterms, despite leading Republicans to one of their largest majorities ever, he only surpassed the votes needed to be Speaker by 4. It was very close. And recently, Mark Meadows from North Carolina, a rogue congressman, had talked about motioning to vacate the chair, which is very rarely used, but embarrassing for Boehner nonetheless.
Right.
Having said that, by all accounts, it seems that it was his decision to step down. He's clearly exhausted from the past 5 years. One of his aides revealed that he actually had planned to step down after the 2014 elections, but Congressman Eric Cantor's primary loss in summer 2014 kind of threw an entire wrench into those plans because he was the natural successor. And with that gone, Boehner kind of wanted to ensure that there was some stability within the caucus moving forward. But I do think this was his decision in the end, and he seems frankly happy about it.
Right. Okay. Well,
The happiest resignation I've ever seen.
relieved. Yeah. So who do you think will be in the running to replace him, or who do you think may win, and what will that person mean for Democrats and Republicans in Congress?
Sure. So I guess I'll go through the 3 positions. For Speaker, now that Jeb Hensarling has declined to run, which I think he was one of the main threats for the position, it looks like Kevin McCarthy has this position if he wants it, which he declared earlier today that he was running for Speaker. Of course, he'll face a challenge from Daniel Webster from Florida, but Webster has his own problems, especially with the maps being redrawn back in Florida for this upcoming cycle. In terms of the other positions, House Majority Leader, now that McCarthy is likely moving up, you're going to see a 3 to 4-way race for that position between Kathy McMorris Rodgers, who you all might remember from the State of the Union response 2 years ago. There's also Scalise, who's currently the whip. He's looking at moving up. And in addition to that, Tom Price is looking at jumping into leadership. At the moment, I have to consider him as a favorite just because he has support from both Paul Ryan and Hensarling. So he has credibility across the spectrum accordingly. But I think it'll be very interesting to see, and it'll be a very close race too. In terms of whip, so far I think Congressman Ross and Congressman Pat McHenry from North Carolina, who's the current deputy whip, have declared interest. I think McHenry has to be considered the favorite right now, but of course there's still a long way to go. So, and with this caucus being the way it is, anything unforeseen can happen. So. But I think McHenry, Price, and McCarthy have to be the 3 favorites at the moment.
Okay.
In terms of what McCarthy's leadership might mean for the caucus, I think it would be a mistake to look at this through purely an ideological lens. I know one of the narratives is that Boehner lost. This is a victory for the far right. McCarthy is actually more moderate than Boehner, and significantly so. One of the main complaints about Boehner was about his leadership style. He's too insular. He has an outdated view on what the government should function as. He blatantly shows favoritism to people he likes and kind of retaliates against people who he doesn't like. McCarthy, on the other hand, is seen as more hands-on in his leadership style, more bottom-up, more willing to work with people. I know, for example, he spends enormous time meeting with his colleagues one-on-one or in small groups to kind of gauge where they are on issues. He kept his office on the first floor despite moving up to majority leader last year, which makes it easier for members to access because he wanted to be more accessible to them. And in addition, I think this is something that's kind of not really looked at. Boehner has been there for a very long time. He's been there since 1991. McCarthy's only been there since 2007, and if he becomes Speaker, which I think he will be the least experienced Speaker since 1891. But On the flip side, McCarthy played a very critical role in recruiting most of these congressmen to the races in the first place when they first ran for Congress. And so, unlike Boehner, he has a personal connection to most of these members, which I think goes a long way, and it's quite underrated, frankly, in how politics in DC works. So I think in terms of caucus cohesion, he'll be better for the Republicans long term.
Okay, and then so then broadening that now, how do you think that the new speaker, presumably by your prediction, McCarthy, would impact the campaign and the new president?
So I think I think a lot of it depends on what Boehner does on his way out, because he's already vowed that there will not be a shutdown this month. But it depends largely on how long of a continuing resolution they pass. If they kick the can in December or at some point next year, we could very well have the same situation we have right now, where the threat of a shutdown, a lot of pressure from the grassroots to shut down, whereas, of course, more mainstream Republicans don't want to shut down the government, fearing that there would be like a backlash on the party's brand. So, like I said, a lot depends on what happens in the next month or so. If the government does shut down, whether it's in December or in next summer, that could definitely have an effect on Republican chances in the general election. So this is not over by any stretch, and it'll be the new speaker's job to jump right in at the end of this month.
Okay, and then my last question is, what significance is there to the fact that he is immediately stepping down rather than waiting until the end of the session and seeking a new term?
Well, that's not honestly all that unusual. After Eric Cantor's primary loss, he resigned, I think, a few weeks after he lost the primary, and kind of just wanted to get out of there and go back to the private sector. I think Boehner, he seemed very happy about the Pope's visit. I think that was a good high point for him to end on. But I think, like I said before, he's just exhausted after the turbulent 5 years he's been Speaker of the House, and kind of just wants to go back to Ohio and spend time with his grandchildren, I think. I don't think there's too much to look into there.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all of your insight on John Boehner's resignation. We really appreciate your time again. And
thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And that's it for tonight on Politik Focus. Thanks, and see you next time.